Well, hello there, and welcome to part 2 of Genre Grinder's epic look back at every single slasher film released in the year 1981. If you didn't listen to part 1 and for some reason don't want to, Patrick and I covered Scream, Ghost Keeper, Corpse Mania, Home Sweet Home, A Day of Judgment, Shri-Gala, Night School, The House Where Death Lives, My Bloody Valentine, Eyes of a Stranger, Murder Obsession, Madhouse, Funhouse, Love Massacre, and Bloody Moon. So, without further ado, let's continue. So that brings us to The Phantom Killer, which is our last Hong Kong movie, directed by Stanley Fung. This was one I found a bootleg copy of. It said it had subtitles. It did not have subtitles. So,
boy, you really committed to this one.
Yeah,
This
at a
episode.
certain point, you just got to watch all the movies. Let's see. This is a Golden Harvest production, not Shaw Brothers, so they're kind of a rival studio. So it might have been made to directly compete with Corpse Mania. I'm not sure. Corpse Mania is the better of the two, but this one is Kung Fu slasher movie, if that's what you're looking for. There's very little I can find about it. There's no wiki page. The IMDb page doesn't even have a plot. The plot on the Letterboxd is talented, young, handsome Siu is a hero to the townsfolk and an idol to the girls. Still, he has an avowed enemy, Badman Cam. Lately, several girls are murdered immediately after they meet Siu. Sheriff Chu is unable to find a lead, but decides to trail Siu. Siu calls his... Oh my god, this just keeps going. Yeah, it's a murder mystery. Stanley Fung was also known as Siu Fang Fung, was a actor for the most part. And he was actually just in a couple movies. He's still acting. It's a Kung Fu period drama meets slasher movie. And they use camera tricks and trampolines rather than wire work, but it still has that kind of supernatural thing that a lot of 80s and especially early 90s Hong Kong action has. Billy Chan is credited as stunt coordinator, who works with Sammo Hung a lot on Magnificent Butcher and My Lucky Stars, which co-stars Jackie Chan. Those are two very good movies. And then Billy Chan also directed Crazy Safari, which is a movie that crosses over the priest from the Mr. Vampire movies and the Bushman from The Gods Must Be Crazy. They got the exact actor too. It's not as good as it sounds.
That sounds pretty good.
It's not as good as it sounds. The killer's costume is this kind of cool paper mache or enamel, whatever it is, skull mask, and he has the big brim bamboo coolie hat with eye holes, the thing that you see in a lot of those kind of kung fu movies. And there's a cool part where they discover that that the killer has hidden a body in a sculpture, sort of like Bucket of Blood. But they discover it, it's kind of in a nastier way. And there was a particularly funny scene where the young heroine follows the killer out of curiosity. The killer beckons her. She knows there's a killer. This might be the killer, but she still follows him out into the middle of nowhere. And gets so startled by a scarecrow in the same costume, and she beats the hell out of this scarecrow that doesn't move. And then when the guy tries to get her, she grabs a big old tree branch and crushes the mask, which is meant to reveal that this is a phantom and not a person. But the later twist is that there's actually more than one person behind this, but the person doing the killing is a dwarf using head and arm extensions. So you can,
wait a second.
so you can bash the head off this thing, and it's not a real human head under the mask. The human head's down in the stomach.
Are you sure this movie isn't better than Corpse Mania?
It doesn't have the craft of Corpse Mania. It's still pretty good. It also has not uncommon for Hong Kong movies to steal music or use catalog music. This one, its main theme is the main theme from Phantasm. It's just Phantasm. It's just absolutely the song from Phantasm. Plays.
If you're gonna rip off a movie's theme music, Phantasm's a fine choice.
The IMDb says it's also music from Fantastic Planet. I don't know which Fantastic Planet they meant.
Another fine choice. I don't know the full score, but if it's the French animated film,
yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
That is a funky ass jazz fusion soundtrack.
Yeah. So yeah, if this one got Blu-ray released by I don't know, there's a couple companies. 88 Films in the UK does Hong Kong horror. This would be something I'd watch again. It's pretty good. And that brings us to Bloody Birthday, which is another, I believe, fan favorite.
Now, this is one that you'll probably talk about on a later episode.
Yeah, this is really a killer kid movie. This is an evil child movie that has slasher accoutrements. It even starts like a kind of Halloween-style slasher movie. There's a character who's kind of a Laurie Strode stand-in. And one of her friends is the daughter of a local sheriff, like Nancy Loomis. But I think that's there to kind of trick us, because I think it's sort of slightly, I don't know. It's a disguised evil kid movie that then reveals itself as an evil kid movie. It's got downtown Julie Brown in a nude dancing sequence, if anybody's into that. But it's really generally just a really good, sleazy but not obscenely sleazy evil kids.
It's got a very good combination of kind of TV movie production values, like the music and the look and everything just kind of feels low rent and quick. So it kind of feels sanitized, except that it is actually really, it goes there, especially with the kids. It pulls no punches. In terms of what the things they do, and not just to adults but to other kids. And so it is a really fun movie to watch, especially to drop on someone who doesn't know what to expect, and because it's kind of shocking in moments. And the kids, there are 3 killer kids in it, and one of them gets basically no lines of dialogue and no personality and no storyline. The other 2 do all the work, and they are both exceptional child actors.
Yeah, the boy is just all around a good actor, and the girl does one of the best mixes of pretending to be innocent, but secretly is much more mature and scary. That's something a lot of kid actors try to do that I don't think they pull off.
This is the entirety of my Letterboxd review when I rewatched this for this podcast. Is about her, and specifically a single moment in it, which is they ask for no homework over the weekend because their birthday is over the weekend. The whole thing is that they were all born on the same day, and there's some astrological implications.
Yeah, they're not related. They're not triplets.
No, they just were all born on the same day during an eclipse, and therefore they're evil. And they ask, can we have no homework over the weekends? Because our birthday's going to be then, and we want everyone at our party. And the teacher is the classic, stern, mean school teacher who's just she goes, just because you are all share a birthday doesn't make you special. And there is this moment, it is maybe a second and a half long, where the little girl actor, whose name is Elizabeth Hoy, just sort of looks at her and has an entire world of thoughts where it's you dumb bitch, you don't even know, you don't fucking know, I'll fucking kill you, you dumb bitch. We're the fucking greatest kids who have ever lived. How dare you imply we're not the most precious children who have ever walked upon God's green earth, you stupid bitch. And then she just sort of smiles and goes, okay. I lost my mind. I had to pause the movie. I was just laughing for a solid minute. It is so incredible. I apologize for saying bitch so much, but like that's the express. That is what she is portraying as a character.
Yes, and you're portraying her.
Yeah.
This isn't Patrick speaking.
God, it is. They are so good, and like this movie is not particularly well made. It's not a great slasher movie. It's not scary really at all, other than just being like generally more disturbing than you expect a little killer kids movie to be. But they elevate it, and it's not often that little kids are able to elevate the movie they're in, but they genuinely do. And I don't think any of them really went on to have much of an acting career.
And that's actually a common. I actually quite like evil kid movies, but all the best ones have either are really well made, have really good kid actors, or have some sort of really bizarre gimmick to them.
All right, but we should move on because you're going to talk more about
that.
Yeah,
I'll talk about that tonight. So, and then another one I don't really think we need to talk about that long is Friday the 13th Part 2.
I do want to say Friday the 13th Part 2, after the end of the first film, this is, okay, so the Friday the 13th series has a whole thing where it takes place in the future because they kept doing big time jumps in between sequels, even though they released a movie every year.
Yes.
So this movie takes place about 10-ish years after the first film. They reopen the camp. This time it's not Jason's mother, it's Jason himself. This is the introduction of Jason before he had the hockey mask. He has the elephant... No, not the Elephant Man sack. He has the...
Yeah, it's the Elephant Man sack in this
It's the Town That Dreaded Sundown.
You're right.
Because we talked about this on the Proto-Slasher episode where it's not just the sack on his face, but also the way they shoot him by shooting his boots and the jeans is all Town That Dreaded Sundown. I will say... We don't need to talk a lot about this because this is the movie most likely to have been seen by listeners to this podcast. I think this is the scariest Friday the 13th movie. I think it is one of the more accomplished Friday the 13th movies. I think Steve Miner is one of the better directors to direct a Friday the 13th movie.
I think this one's better than 3, which he also directed.
Yes, I like 3 a lot. I think I like 3 more than a lot of people, but this is the better of the two. This has a really good cast of teenagers. It has a lot of little things that are not what you. It's like, oh, this is just what movies do. This does not make a movie great. But in the realm of Friday the 13th movies, Steve Miner puts a little more thought into it than most people. And there's just little setups and payoffs of like a spear that comes up later and a missing dog that you think got killed by Jason. And then there's a fake out with that. And there's just a lot of little touches that add up to a slasher movie that is way more accomplished than a lot of its peers, especially in its own franchise.
Yeah, my only 2 notes is that one, Amy Steele is probably the best final girl in this franchise.
She's so good.
She's good on a lot of levels. She's really, really good, and I don't think it's hyperbole to say this. And also, this is one that was hurt by MPAA cuts. MPAA was angry because they got shit for letting the first Friday the 13th go through uncut. And so they really took it out on a lot of movies the next year, but especially this one. And you can tell there are some really jagged cutaways from what would probably have been a really cool bloody special effect. This is one, I think this is one of the, we've had so many movies that we know were cut for our ratings, that they found the footage. This is, I think, one of the few holy grails of that type left. There's still like missing movies and movies that are director's cuts that are missing. This is one where just the gore footage to be found would be a pretty big deal.
Do you think that it's just that for this series the footage is genuinely missing outside of like weird work print videotape, or do you think it's that it's owned by a major studio and therefore they're less willing?
Yes, like, I think that if somebody like Scream Factory or Synapse Films or Blue Underground or Arrow got their hands on these somehow, they would be able to find this footage, I think.
Because the, like, they released, quote unquote, Paramount released the first film, the uncut version, and it's basically identical.
And from what I understand, that was actually a mistake originally. They didn't realize that they were releasing. There was such a small cut to it that they didn't even realize they were releasing an uncut version until someone pointed it out to them.
But obviously, even more so than this film, later entries in the series, like especially like Part 7.
7 is big, yeah, and they have some of the footage on the Blu-ray, but it looks like VHS quality. It's hard to tell what's happening, and it's not put back into the movie. I think it needs to be back in the movie to really count.
At any rate, I think this movie is a very good slasher movie. I really do enjoy it. I like I like all the big studio slasher franchises, I think, more than you do, Gabe.
Yeah, well, we'll get to one in a bit here, but I do really like the first 6 Friday the 13th and the first 5 Nightmare on Elm Streets.
Sure. Oh, okay. So it's just mostly the Halloween sequels that you don't have any use of.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, no, for sure. Other thing worth noting is this movie came out around summer of 1981. So the last movie we're going to be talking about that came out in November of 1981 is The Prowler, and that movie has the same sort of ending. There's a sequence where the final girl who looks just like Amy Steele.
Yeah.
Is hiding under some furniture, and then a rat comes up to her. Yeah. It's like exact duplicate, but I saw facts about The Prowler that imply that maybe it was shot in 1980 and it was sort of it was shelved for a long time. I don't know if that's true or not, but
sure.
We can talk maybe a little bit more about that later when The Prowler comes up. But if The Prowler ripped off Friday the 13th Part 2, it's possible because a lot of these movies had really quick turnarounds, but
yeah,
they do have weirdly similar endings.
Yeah. Not as weirdly similar as Madhouse and Happy Birthday to Me, but yes. Which brings us to Graduation Day, directed by Herb Fried, who directed a couple decent B movies, The Haunts and Beyond Evil. This one I've slacked off on the descriptions. After a high school track runner named Laura suddenly dies from a heart attack after finishing a 30-second 200-meter race, a killer wearing a sweatsuit and fencing mask begins killing off her friends on the school track team one by one. This is a bad movie that I like.
It's very fun. It's a lot of fun.
My favorite thing about the entire movie is the opening titles look like a promotional short for a track and field that like they'd show you in school in the 70s or 80s. It's like a bunch of B-roll sports shot at low angles.
I think you're underselling the editing phantasmagoria that is the opening credits of this movie. It's
a disco song, and it's cut to the rhythm of the disco song.
It's incredible looking. It's borderline experimental editing.
And it just keeps shouting, "Everybody wants to be a winner." But it really does. Okay. I won't say promotional track and field. I'll say this is an official Olympic track and field promo.
Yes.
That you would see as between Pepsi commercials.
Absolutely.
In the 80s. Okay.
It feels like at some point in time, the editor, for whatever reason, had an extra week where it was like, oh, we got to reshoot this. So you thought you were going to be editing these scenes, but we don't have those for you. It feels like someone had too much time on their hands and just went so fucking extra. There's a couple of scenes throughout. There's a couple of murder scenes that have that same editing thing.
Yeah.
This is not a well-made movie. This is not a particularly artsy horror film like you would hope it to be from the opening credits.
But you think it is from the... Yeah. I always expect Christopher George to turn to the camera and say, "Hi, I'm Hollywood actor Christopher George. You may remember me from such classics as City of Living Dead. Yeah. I'm here today to talk to you about sports."
So good. And I also like that this movie is just a fucking Bugs Bunny cartoon when it comes to the actual kills.
Well, it's as close as I think we would get, if we're not counting Final Destination 5, to a sports slasher. I don't know if there again, you're right. There's probably some weird trauma movie that's all about sports equipment being used to kill people. But the killer does use sports equipment the entire movie, and time has a time clock to tie into the a time clock, a stopwatch to tie into the beginning of the fact that the killer's avenging this young lady who had a heart attack because this asshole PE teacher. At a high school? Is this a high school?
It is a high school.
Why is this guy so aggro? It's just high school.
He is as if it is a Texas football team.
But he's also the track and the gymnastics teacher. He's like both. There's some good kills and there's some funny kills.
It's really fun.
It's good killer POV shots. There's a really nice shot where we can see a darkened reflection of the killer in a window during a tracking shot through the girls' locker room. The camera's following, and we could see that he's on the other side of a window, but she doesn't see him. That was actually a pretty good, scary shot. It has Lena Quigley in it.
Which character is she? Because I saw her in the credits and then immediately forgot, and I could not pick her out of the lineup.
She's the blonde.
Okay, cool.
She replaced the other actress who decided she didn't want to do nudity.
Oh, yeah.
So she gets beheaded, and then later in the movie, they didn't have time to make a head molding of her. So later in the movie, when the killer displays all the bodies, it's the other actress's head who she replaced. And the dialogue. Oh yeah, the killer wears black gloves, which is sort of giallo-esque. And then there's a live band part that, again, doesn't really have much to do with the story.
But they're all dressed as 1930s gangsters.
And that reason they are so into that song is because the name of the band was Felony. They gave them the song. They said they don't have to pay any licensing fees for that song.
Well, it paid off because now Felony is a household name.
Well, honestly, where else was Felony going to go with that, you know? I think it was a good idea myself because that is the only way anybody's going to remember the local whatever town band Felony is the fact that they were in this one movie. And so at least their music was heard, and it was in the trailers too. That's the other thing.
I'm sure some horror convention has reunited Felony.
I'm sure
at some point. As someone who has seen Herschel Gordon Lewis perform "The South Is Gonna Rise Again" live, like that happens.
Yeah.
Also, okay, so I have the J.A. Kershwell book, the slasher movie book, in front of me, and he says that this movie cost $250,000, which is extremely low. And that it topped the LA box office before it went wider than just LA. If you go on, it's either IMDb or Box Office Mojo, it's like they claimed it's some absurd amount of money, like $16 million or something like that. Which I don't know if that's true. It's box office reporting in the 80s for like small movies can be kind of iffy, especially like in terms of budget reporting as well. But if this movie made like $16 million on a $250,000 budget, this is one of the most ridiculously profitable movies ever.
Yeah. It's currently owned by Troma, but Troma didn't make it.
No, but it fits into, like, I saw it originally as a Troma released DVD, and I totally believe they did.
Yeah. It's just a little bit too old for what they were doing at that time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like that one. That brings us to one of the best, The Burning, directed by Tony Maylam. Tony Maylam's only other movie had ever seen that he made was Split Second, which is a kind of fun B sci-fi action movie with Rutger Hauer. May he rest in peace. I think this might be my favorite summer camp slasher movie, other than maybe Friday Part 6, which actually has fucking summer camp. Like, they're actual children. But this one has more of that whole vibe of teenagers at summer camp.
I think this one has the kids as well. They just cast everyone the same age.
Yeah. Yeah, you have no idea how... This is one of those movies that's great where I cannot tell the difference between the campers and the counselors, except for two. There's two people who are clearly counselors, and everyone else, Jason Alexander and Fisher Stevens both look old enough to be uh, counselors in this one. And they're both, and Holly Hunter's in this one. She has like no lines. I think she cries once.
I think all the main characters in this are the counselors, and then all the characters that get 1 to 0 lines are the campers.
Do you think so? Okay, because I'm honestly not sure, because I swear there's scenes where people are bossing around Fisher Stevens and Jason Alexander as if they're counselors, but maybe they're just the in-charge counselors.
Yeah, there's a whole hierarchy. It's like the bureaucracy of summer camps. You don't even want to get into it.
I've only ever gone to the Jewish Community Center camp, and that's not even, you don't even stay overnight there.
No.
You just go make arts and crafts and get free challah bread. But yeah, I mean, this might be the most future famous people. Like, it doesn't just have one Kevin Bacon or one Jennifer Jason Leigh. It has 3 future pretty big time. 2 Oscar winners. Fisher Stevens has an Oscar for production, and a Jason Alexander, who is very good
and deserves an Emmy.
Yeah, you know what,
George? I don't know if he ever got one, but he deserved it.
He probably did. I'm sure he did. But he's very good in this, and he's charming in this.
Yeah,
which is saying something, because he's known for non-charming characters.
The sort of jokester slasher movie character archetype is a fraught sort of role that can either be the thing that lifts up a movie and makes it very fun and watchable, or the thing that makes you just like, fuck, I hate these people, just kill them already. Yeah. And I think Jason Alexander in this does a really great job. Actually, I think the guy from Halloween 2, the redheaded guy, he also is very good.
Yeah.
But Jason Alexander is very charming in this.
Jason Alexander's great. Fisher Stevens is good in the role. He's not a standout, but he's very well cast. He's one of the more believable, lanky teenagers.
This is the first movie slasher movie that the Weinsteins were involved in before they made Scream. I think there's like no slasher movies in between this and Scream.
Yeah,
so they have a fantastic record as far as that goes.
Well, and also this movie kind of rose the Weinsteins to prominence. This made them quite a bit of money.
Yeah,
and gave them some clout.
You can thank Sex, Lies, and Videotape. From The Burning.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, you could probably draw that direct line there, and then at that point, they kind of blow up as a big deal, and so you can also blame this movie.
Yes, for the absolutely. This is terrible, and Tom Savini should be ashamed. We always said these were misogynist. We just didn't know the route it took to get there.
It was a long, it was a roundabout. I always feel really bad for the one girl who dies after having sex with the guy who's sort of the bully, but turns out to be a sort of nice guy.
The thing about this movie that is interesting is it cares more about the campers than, obviously, the trope of the slasher movie full of assholes who you're rooting for their deaths. That came later, when it was clear that the breakout stars of these slasher movies were Michael Myers, Jason, and Freddy.
Yeah.
So that it hasn't popped up as much in these 1981 films. You have the stray sort of, jerk who is, just causing drama and stuff because you need to do something before the people get killed. But this movie in particular, you really care about the characters. There's a scene where everyone realizes that often in slasher movies, the scene where it's like, oh my god, everyone around me has been being killed. It happens to a single person who has kind of a breakdown and then has to sort of rally and fight the killer. This time it happens to like a whole island full of people, and there's just a tracking shot of everyone losing their minds crying about like, oh my god, we're gonna die, this is so messed up. And I love it. There's never been a scene like that in any other slasher movie where it's like, no, this is a disaster. You would have a full-on emotional breakdown if you were in this situation.
This is one in Men, Women, and Chainsaws. The author says this is a prime example of the final girl actually being a boy who is coded as not male, like as less male is the way she describes it. Carol Clover describes it. And she says that he essentially fills the same role in the film. There's other stuff in this book. It's an older book, so there's some problematic gender politics attached to the book. But I do find this idea interesting, which is going to come up again in just a little bit here, of the certain character stereotypes. They can be male or female, but it's just about masculine versus feminine more than male versus female, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, this is a great movie. This
Tom
is my
Savini.
favorite Tom Savini effects of this era. I love the finger cutting. This is one of my favorite backstories for the killer because, you know, he got a bum, you know, and it doesn't have any transphobic undercurrent. Like, Terror Train also has a spectacular opening scene, but it's super, like, problematic.
Yeah.
By the end of the movie.
By the time you finish Terror Train, it's hard to have a good feeling in 2019.
Right. But there is still, anyway. And I think we'll come back to this, but this movie was originally entitled Cropsey after the killer. Mm-hmm. But it isn't actually based on the urban legend of Cropsey, which is a New York-style boogeyman.
It's only based in that I think the Weinsteins came from New York, and they had heard it, so they took the name from it.
And at some point, it was discovered that director Joe Giannone, I can't do Italian names.
You know, if you're going to keep doing this podcast, you better learn.
Giannone.
You better get some Duolingo or something.
I know. Maybe I'll just use robot voices. Anyway, he was also making a slasher film that was actually based on the Cropsey legend. And it was figured out because an actor trying out for one movie had a girlfriend who said, "Oh, there's this other movie I tried out for that has a guy named Cropsey." And so that movie had its name changed to Madman. And it was actually put on hold because it was agreed between Giannone and the Weinsteins that I guess the public couldn't handle two Cropsey-themed movies, even though one of them wasn't even Cropsey-themed. And I've read between the lines that the Weinsteins somehow threatened him.
Yeah.
There's nothing written about that, but knowing what we know about the Weinsteins, I'm sure they somehow threatened him. And because of that, Madman was not actually released wide until '83.
And apparently, like, you know, the Weinsteins were still the Weinsteins even in 1981 because the director has talked about, like, hearing two different demands from both the Weinstein brothers while on the set and, like, how just how much of a nightmare it was to shoot because they just wanted so much input and they were just monkeying around with it so much.
Yeah, so, anyway.
Weinstein's gonna Weinstein. That actually has implications now. I did not.
We can't say.
Sorry about that.
You can't even complain about them anymore because it turned out so much worse than we all assumed.
Right? Yeah, like we were mad that they messed up Hero. It's like fuck off. Who cares about Hero?
Yeah, that wasn't a problem now.
Yeah.
Okay, that brings us to Happy Birthday to Me, which is probably better known for its cover art / poster than it is actually as a movie of a man getting a shish kebab shoved into his mouth. This one's directed by J. Lee Thompson.
Hell yeah, Cape Fear.
And it says Virginia is proud that she belongs to a clique, the best students at a private school. But before her 18th birthday, a grueling set of murders takes place, and her friends are the ones who are falling prey. Could it be her? She suffers from blackouts during a freak accident 1 year earlier. We soon learn the truth behind her accident and what's going on. That's a decent coverage of the thing. Yeah, I guess I forgot. This is another big name director, Gums of Navarone and Cape Fear. So you have one directed by the director of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and you have another one directed by Guns of Navarone and Cape Fear. Again, also a guy who apparently wanted to do this.
It pays. Like, this movie is well directed. I did not get a chance to rewatch this for this show, but I have seen it in the past, and I'm a big fan.
There's a funny thing. You realize it tries to cover the fact that it's Canadian, but you realize it's Canadian because the big important game at this school is a soccer game and not a football or basketball game.
Good point.
I was like, wait, why is it a soccer game? Who gives a shit about soccer in the 80s? Oh, it's Canadian. There we are. The filmmakers readily admit to making it birthday themed because it was a, quote, holiday that hadn't been made into a slasher yet, not knowing Bloody Birthday was going to beat them to theaters. Apparently, the director had a good time, but Glenn Ford was miserable and shitty to everyone and punched an AD and had to be walked off set, and he was known for locking himself in his trailer and stuff, so did not pay off to get an older actor at a cheap price. Though, I don't know what your book says, but I read that this cost $3 million.
Yes, this was. Hold on, I can pull it up in a second. But yeah, this.
That's a lot of money. I think it looks pricier than a lot of these movies.
Yeah, there are car stunts in the beginning. It's long. It's not
that's
just
true.
like a quick 80-minute sort of a slasher movie.
Yeah, there's a thing that happens twice in the movie where there's a drawbridge in town and teens are jumping over it. And it's a pretty spectacular stunt. And then later in the movie, we have a flashback where someone doesn't make it over and falls in the water. So that's 2 cars you destroyed, and you had to shut down that road and get permission to use this drawbridge and get good enough stunt performers that knew what they were doing. And there's a weird thing about the drawbridge stunt that these teens are so toxically masculine that that one destroys his car for a $20 bet. Because he's being called chicken. He just ruins his car. But the bet was only $20 that he would be too chicken to jump the thing.
I recall really liking the characters of this film.
Well, this is one of those movies that has unlikable, well-done characters.
I think that's what I
I
like the actors. I like the performances.
They're rich assholes to the nth degree. Like, this is one that doesn't fuck around with... a lot of these movies have this implication that these are kind of rich kids, that these are well-to-do kids, and they're almost always white kids, and they're almost always at either a nice school, like a some sort of special school, or they're at a summer school thing that probably wasn't cheap. This one goes out of its way to say that these people are bad because they are spoiled rich kids. It's a college campus slasher. This is like if you wanted to find a college campus slasher, I think this is a good one to show to someone who's never seen and doesn't understand what you mean by that. There's one murder that is just a backseat strangling from Halloween.
Mm-hmm. There's a really good murder in the weight room.
Yeah, there's a great weight room murder, which is you've seen similar murders in other movies, but I think this is probably the best version of that.
Yeah, at least until Tragedy Girls, which is a film that came out a year ago or 2 years ago, and I highly recommend it.
I haven't seen that one.
Great. If you like Scream and you want to see like a sort of a postmodern take on a slasher movie that isn't necessarily just like full on shitty, like we know we're doing the tropes, like Tragedy Girls is great.
I think I was confusing it with Final Girls, which I did see.
Yeah, I do not like that
which was
film
also,
at all.
It was okay. It was that one was fine. I don't remember a lot about it, but it was okay. This also has this giallo thing going on where it has pseudoscience playing a role in the plot, and that it also has and then repressed memories being tied to that pseudoscience. A lot of post-Dario Argento movies had some sort of dumb scientific thing that doesn't do much, but that the authorities are tying to the crimes. And there's this funny thing where this girl the girl has repressed memories, and no one is helping her work through these memories for some reason, including her psychologist and her brain surgeon. They're like all she needs to do is hear that she was part of this accident where her mom died, but for some reason people are keeping it secret, including her dad. And so it has that thing where you sort of suspect the dad is the killer because he's keeping secrets from his daughter.
It's also probably the longest slasher movie until Scream 2.
Yeah, it's pretty long, and it feels pretty long. I've heard that there are MPAA cuts on this one.
Yes.
And it was an ad campaign with 6 of the most bizarre murders you will ever see, and I would not say that they are. But it was kind of a cool ad campaign. But there is the brain surgery flashback is really gross, like something you'd see in Reanimator gross. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, like I mentioned, this essentially has the same ending as Madhouse, but the twist is in this one is that there's a doppelganger who's not really a doppelganger, whereas in Madhouse they're actual twins. And I have suspected that the dead mom and the dad being weird about the dead mom and the killer's motive actually were all maybe influential on Scream. That might have been where Kevin Williamson got kind of that stuff from Scream.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can see it.
It's possible. I don't know exactly which movies were the influences there, but That brings us to The Fan, which is another studio picture directed by Ed Bianchi.
Not quite a slasher movie.
No, not really. This is definitely a studio thriller that realized slasher movies were getting popular and tried to add a little bit of that to the mix. The plot is a record store clerk is an obsessive fan of an actress of stage and screen. However, when his letters are rejected, the fan strikes out at the actress's friends and then her. Ed Bianchi didn't make a lot of movies, but he made some of the best television you've ever seen, including Deadwood, The Wire, Mad Men, Boardwalk Empire, which isn't that great but looks great, and The Get Down. I honestly wonder if this was set out to be a kind of Hitchcock or by way of De Palma, so like a second degree. They're mimicking De Palma, mimicking Hitchcock, basically. And I think it probably started that way, and then they made the scenes a little more violent. It looks nice, and the thing is this is probably the biggest. Lauren Bacall was almost definitely the biggest star in any of these movies that we're going to cover. But she was on the tail end of her career at this point. She retired from screen acting and did mostly voice work after not too long after this. But this does have a pre-Terminator Michael Biehn. And James Garner is in a small role. Maureen Stapleton's in a small role. Hector Lozano is in a small role. Griffin Dunn is in a really small role. And Dana Delaney is in a really small role, too. And it's sort of... I get a feeling that it started as Sunset Boulevard, but the killer... But the younger male protagonist is a killer rather than just a... Like, it has a Sunset Boulevard thing where Bacall's character is in the sunset of her career, but it kind of pulls away from that because she's about to have a very big deal musical is what she's preparing for the whole movie. And so a lot of the movie is devoted to this musical and the production of this musical, to the point where you could probably delete Michael Biehn entirely from the film and you would still have almost an hour's worth of film about an actress trying to get her, third wind with this big, expensive musical.
This is again relevant as Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is now in theaters.
I don't see movies, Patrick. I don't know from movies.
Well, that is, I'm not spoiling anything by saying that is what Leonardo DiCaprio's character is primarily concerned with.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes.
On the tail end of his career, and like just large amounts of time being spent on the nitty gritty of that.
Yeah. Apparently, the producer of the film was known for musicals and musical infused movies, so that's why it's like this. It's hilarious because the musical is awful. Yeah, it's really bad, and I feel bad saying this, but Bacall's singing is atrocious.
Well, she's not known as a singer.
No, and so I don't understand why they built this role around her singing skill and then didn't dub her or anything. Like and so there's like at the end of the movie when she does her play or her musical and she sings and she gets a standing ovation for this just terrible singing, but she's otherwise very, very good. She takes it seriously. She enjoys it. Apparently she hated the movie after the fact, and apparently it was very controversial, not because Bacall was in a slasher movie, but because it was released very close to John Lennon's murder. And so people didn't like the idea of that. I think the movie falls apart because it a lot of the time feels like what if we had a version of Taxi Driver where the anti-villain character, the Travis Bickle character, was super handsome, because there's a lot of like, look how attractive. There's a really weird scene that is maybe the most R-rated scene in the movie, where he goes to he realizes he's been found out and he wants to fake his own death, so he goes to a gay bar and picks up a guy and takes him to a back alley, or no, not a back alley, but the roof of a building, and in the middle of getting a blowjob, and it is implied that he is getting a blowjob and enjoying it, he cuts the guy's throat and then pours gasoline on the body and burns it, leaves a suicide note, hoping that the police will assume it's him.
Jesus.
And so I was first kind of shocked at how graphic this scene was in this otherwise not very graphic movie. For instance, he doesn't actually kill a lot of people. He mostly just attacks people. And it's kind of shocking that they don't just identify him because he's not wearing a mask or anything. But as soon as I got over the shock, I realized that's almost what happens in Dario Argento's opera. It's also about an obsessive guy stalking a opera star instead of a musical star, and that he fakes his own death by lighting a mannequin on fire. And so I do wonder, I could imagine Dario Argento watching this movie, honestly.
Sure, I mean, it's not well remembered now, but at the time, I'm sure it got a wider release than most.
And you'd be surprised how many movies end up being popular in Italy for some weird reason. And the opening scenes are reminiscent of Deep Red, in that they're massive close-ups on just various objects on Michael Biehn's desk. And then it also has a Pino Donaggio score, which I could imagine attracting someone like Dario Argento.
Sure.
My favorite thing was the record store. Apparently, the only songs they could get the rights to use in the record store scenes were Two-Tone Records songs by the Specials and the Selector. And as a fan of 80s British ska, I was very happy about that myself.
We'll talk about that more later when we get to Just Before Dawn. Some of the songs that pop up in these movies just blows my mind.
Yeah.
Final Exam, I don't know if is a movie worth talking that much about.
People like it, and I don't really know why.
Yeah.
It's by Jimmy Huston, who is not related to the famous Hustons, Jack and Angelica, etc. A small college town in North Carolina, only a select few students are left to take midterms. But when a killer strikes, it could be everyone's final exam. And that really is the movie. One thing I'll say about it is it is a prank slasher movie. There is a small thing where Graduation Day has a bit of that. Splatter University, and especially the dorm that dripped blood, which is also known as Pranks, have this prank slasher thing going on where there's like a idea that pranks have become too violent, kind of thing.
This is a North Carolina college slasher movie, and by all accounts, it was a big influence on Kevin Williamson when he wrote Scream 2. It certainly steals the scene where the kid is tied up for giving his ring to the girl.
Oh, yeah.
And then later gets killed because he's all tied up. That is just lifted verbatim for Scream 2. It has a weird Black Christmas sort of a thing where the killer's never explained who they are or why it's happening.
Yeah, he's just a guy.
And there's no mask or hiding the identity.
Yeah, he's got this page boy haircut like Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men.
It's a thing where like it would be disturbing if done correctly, but it's just not quite done correctly. So instead it kind of deflates everything because you're just like, oh, it's just a guy. It's just like he's not scary in any way.
And his final showdown with the final girl is just this never-ending, boring trip up the stairs. It's there are, I think, two things worth talking about. One is the character of Radish.
Yeah.
Portrayed by Joel S. Rice. Who
not a gay man, but the character, I think, is gay.
Well, he's obsessed with the girl, but it might be performative. I think he's gay, too. And I really want him to be the, quote, final girl.
Yeah.
But he dies, and it deflates the movie. Again, that's another thing that deflates the movie, is that this really likable, effeminate man, who seems like he's going to be one thing that is interesting about this movie, is just sort of killed like everyone else.
And he is sort of the entry point to, I think, why the killer is who it is, which is he's sort of, there's a brief scene in the beginning where he's talking about Charles Whitman, and he has this weird admiration, and he's in awe of Charles Whitman, the sniper who shot people in the tower in, I forget what Texas University, but that was the 70s, so this is not that much long later. And so I think this is trying to be a similar thing where it's just sort of like sometimes random violence happens for no reason at all, and isn't that what's scary?
Yeah, but they just can't quite get there.
Yeah.
The other thing I think we're talking about is that there's this one sequence that I think would have played a lot different in 1981.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Where a black van pulls up and people in ski masks jump out with assault rifles and open fire, and they kill a bunch of people and kidnap some other ones. And a bunch of people, and the other kids are sitting around confused, like, what is this horrible, violent terrorist attack? But very quickly, two girls notice that the van belongs to like this fraternity, and that it was a very elaborate prank. And the authorities even chide Radish for bothering to call them about this staged
about this mass
armed
shooting
attack. And they're like, this wasn't even, and then nobody talks about it like ever again throughout the entire movie.
Because of course it's ridiculous thinking about a mass shooting happening on it.
But so this scene is just, it's jaw dropping in its I don't know what other words to say. It's just jaw dropping because it would not work ever again.
It's offensive.
Like, that would be. The
I know we're afraid to say the word offensive because we're people who watch exploitation movies all day, but like it is like you watch it, you're like, oh, gross.
Yeah, but I don't think I would have found it offensive, even being myself, my sensitive self, in 1991.
No, it's true.
I think I would have it wouldn't have had the same connotation. Not even 10 years later, or no, I guess I don't remember when Columbine happened. 98.
Yeah, 98.
So it wouldn't be too much longer, but yeah, it still wouldn't have the same connotation for a while. Anyway, I think it's a boring movie.
It is.
I don't think the kills are particularly good, so I don't know. I would skip it.
You know what is not a boring movie? Roadgames.
Roadgames, directed by Richard Franklin, who got the gig directing Psycho 2 because the producers liked this movie so much. A truck driver plays cat and mouse game with a mysterious serial killer who uses young female hitchhiker as bait to lure victims on a desolate Australian highway.
Not exactly a slasher movie.
No, really not. It's Rear Window meets Duel.
It's a brilliant premise. The idea of Rear Window on the highway is like, if you pitch that to me, I would say, what do you mean? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
But it makes a lot of sense the way they play it.
Yeah. There are a couple references to Psycho and North by Northwest, and Christine pointed out that there is a It Happened One Night gag, and I had totally missed that, and I didn't mark down what it was, but apparently there's a Happened One Night.
Is it like there's the wall in between the bed?
Yep, that's it. That was the one.
The Walls of Jericho.
Yeah, the Walls of Jericho. It's the second Rear Window movie on here, and the much better one. And it's our first Ozploitation movie, though it was made by an Australian crew in Australia. The leads are Stacy Keach and Jamie Lee Curtis.
And the director's not Australian.
And the director's not Australian. So it really feels like an American medium budget, not even exploitation film, but an American medium budget thriller that was shot in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, and that is the premise of the movie is like part of the isolation the character feels is that he is a foreigner, and therefore he doesn't necessarily know the customs, and people don't trust him, and like that's why he knows there's a serial killer operating on this highway, but he just can't get anyone to believe him.
And it's not an incidentally Australian movie either. There's a really interesting scene, I think, where he stops in a roadside diner, and it's a scene. It's similar to a scene in Duel, but he stops at a roadside diner to call the authorities. And not only are none of the people in the diner trusting of him because of his American accent, but the camera pans around the diner, and the diner has a mural of the British enslaving the Aboriginals. Mm-hmm. Like as a decorative element, and it's like here's it's
the equivalent of like a Confederate flag if this was happening in the South,
right? And so it's giving us I think really vital thematic substance without spelling it out for us. And the thing that makes this movie work is that Stacy Keach is interesting enough to be with for 45 minutes of runtime
of talking to himself
alone. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really good in that. I mean, Jamie Lee Curtis was sort of at her peak. I feel like this through like A Fish Called Wanda, she is just like the most charming person who is like, oh, you could have had a massive career in the 40s. Like you could have been like a comedic lead in the 40s and 50s. You could have not necessarily had Debbie Reynolds' career. Debbie Reynolds is her mom. Not necessarily have her career because what am I talking about? That's Carrie Fisher's mom. Her mom is her dad is Tony Curtis. At any rate, her mom is Janet Leigh. Same difference. Could have.
You know what though? She might have a better career than Janet Leigh overall.
No, that's without question.
But yeah, it was sold as a slasher movie in part because she was in it, and she was still coming off of Halloween and Prom Night and Terror Train at that point. But it's not a slasher movie. There's one scene at the very beginning of the killer killing somebody. It's the only scene with any real violence, and it's still implied. And it is the only scene with any nudity, and it's mostly implied. I feel like this is a PG-13 movie before the PG-13 rating.
Yeah,
existed.
there's a moment of implication that is gross when he realizes that the weight of his truck is a little different.
Yes, which is a very Hitchcock thing. I think that a lot of people say this movie's Hitchcock-like because it had suspense, but no, having an extra piece of meat maybe be in your meat, and also the fact that it's a meat wagon, literal meat wagon, is a Hitchcock joke. But there's an extra.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, but there's like extra weight, and he thinks maybe there's an extra slab of meat, and he thinks maybe the killer put one of the bodies in there, but he doesn't know.
And also like the idea of like Hitchcock's sense of humor being implying something horrific, but not outright saying it, and therefore getting away with it. I think the thing, like, we're going to talk about Blowout next, and I am not a De Palma fan. And I think the thing that always gets to me about De Palma's movies that this is sort of a good antidote to and a good counterpoint to is that De Palma's movies are obsessive about referencing Hitchcock and about stealing shots from Hitchcock and stuff like that. But the thing about Hitchcock movies is they all have great scripts with very charming actors and great dialogue, and they're super well paced and plotted, and that is what makes them Hitchcock movies. And De Palma's scripts are almost uniformly really dumb. And this movie is the sort of Hitchcock love letter that also has the witty banter of a 39 Steps or The Lady Vanishes sort of a thing, where the two unlikely the women and the male and female leads sort of get together and form an unlikely friendship and budding romance as they try to solve
I enjoy that their relationship is so platonic. I think that makes it even more charming, honestly.
I think
there is a romantic implication, but it's not forceful.
No, and that's true of a lot of the Hitchcock movies as well, is that they're intellectual equals. And it's only at the end that they sort of kiss.
And this one, I think they don't even kiss.
No, they do not. This one plays it even more straight as far as it being platonic. But I really like this movie a lot. I think the second half, the pacing kind of gets a little wonky. It's not quite like, I love everything in the first 45 minutes or so. I love Jamie Lee Curtis and Stacy Keach in this. I think once Jamie Lee Curtis leaves the movie for a while, that's when it starts to not quite know what to do, how to wrap things up. But it's a great, amazing script. Richard Franklin does an incredible job with it. It's not a slasher movie, but I can see why it gets listed, and I enjoyed watching it for the first time for this episode nonetheless.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good movie. Highly recommended. It just got announced. Scream Factory is going to be putting it out in its first U.S. Blu-ray.
Cool. Just right after I bought the region-free Umbrella Blu-ray, which is good as well.
Probably look the same. They'll look the same. I'm sure that they're working from the same transfer.
And there's a lot of special features on that Blu-ray as well. So if you want to get that one,
they might even recycle them. Scream Factory is not the type to not recycle. That brings us to Blowout, which is a movie I know isn't a slasher movie, and I didn't even see on other lists, but I wanted to include it just because it was a Hollywood movie that referenced slasher movies at a time when slasher movies were still pretty new. And it opens like a fake slasher movie. It's directed by Brian De Palma. The plot is Jack Terry is a master sound recordist who works on grade B horror movies. Late one evening, he is recording sounds for use in his movies when he hears something unexpected through his sound equipment and records it. Curiosity gets the better of him when the media becomes involved, and he begins to unravel a piece of a nefarious conspiracy. As he struggles to survive against his shadowy enemies and expose the truth, he does not know whom he can trust. This is basically partway between Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up and Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation.
Yes.
Both of which are better movies, but I actually really like this movie. This is probably my second favorite De Palma thriller, behind Sisters, and maybe my fourth favorite De Palma movie behind Carrie, Sisters, and Phantom of the Paradise. In fact, those four movies, if you would tell me what De Palma movies should I see, I would tell you those four movies. And I like.
I would add in Mission Impossible, but
maybe, and maybe Carlito's Way, and like I understand. Scarface is a movie I think people should see. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I think it is a movie to understand the '80s kind of situation. Which he actually made that after this. This was made in the wake of Dressed to Kill, which is a movie some people might be surprised to hear I kind of hate. I don't like Dressed to Kill. I think it's really gross and weird, and I don't like the characters. I don't like what it has to say. I don't like the way it's made. I think this is the better version of let's do some Hitchcock-like stuff, but it still feels like Brian De Palma's name, his stamp is on it. I think the characters are much more interesting, though. I think Nancy Allen is miscast, but I kind of think she's always miscast.
Yeah, there's a weird thing in this movie where every scene that she's in is about how dumb and naive she is.
Yeah.
And then at the end, they're like trying to play it like, oh my God, I can't believe she died. You cared so much about her. And it's like, no, you've just been making fun of her this whole movie. What do you...
And I've always been a little bothered by the fact that she and De Palma were an item during the 1-2 punch of this movie and Dressed to Kill. It's just something.
The way those characters come off is just like,
as dumb prostitutes basically is all they are. Anyway,
this to me though, like Roadgames, and the reason why I think this is better than a lot of his other sort of wannabe Hitchcock movies, is this movie is a genuinely smart, fascinating idea of a way of taking a different movie's ideas and recontextualizing them. Like the political thriller version of Blow Up with the sound recording and everything is like it's really cool.
And it's interesting because both Blow Up and the Conversation don't give us answers in the end. This one gives us answers in the end, but might actually be the most depressing ending of all three. They all have different degrees of well, I guess Blow Up isn't a depressing ending as much as a purposefully misleading ending. Like it's purposely not giving us what we want. And then Conversation is purposefully depressing. But then this one is just like a huge bummer to the point where it's almost a comedic level bummer.
Yeah.
I don't know if I think the tone of that final reveal works for me. I think it was something that apparently critics really hated at the time.
Well, if you're watching this movie and you're still trying to think of it as something taking place in the real world, as opposed to watching it as part of the De Palma filmography and De Palma land and like his own cult following, the idea of that sound recording being in that movie is absolutely ludicrous. I guess
what we're so
sorry.
We have to spoil this to explain what we're saying. If you haven't seen the movie.
I feel like if you're the kind of film dork who is listening to Genre Grinder, you probably have seen this film.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll just leave it at that then. And I think John Lithgow is a fabulous killer in this movie. I think that he's genuinely frightening, and I think that that's one element that sort of works as
that is the slasher subplot that sort of happens in the background that I always forget about exists, and then when you like put it on your list, I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Because I forgot about that John Lithgow subplot.
There's just that opening scene, and then there's the John Lithgow subplot, but you could kind of remove. He's just sort of an assassin. In a normal movie, he would be off screen with like a gun, and he wouldn't even be a major character, but instead he's this basically slasher killer guy. Anyway, yeah, I like this movie a lot, and
I really like this movie until the third act, and then I'm like, oh, it's De Palma. This is stupid. I can't.
Well, and I think that says something that we both like this, and you don't really like De Palma, and I'm about half and half on De Palma. I think that really says something about how good it is.
The next film is it's such a milestone. I can't believe it took until 1981. The first horror comedy ever made. Yeah, because I guess Roger Corman does not exist.
Yeah, or like
James Whale.
Yeah, I was gonna say The Invisible Man. This is Student Bodies by Mickey Rose. It is the first official slasher parody, and it is in fact a slasher parody.
Oh yeah.
I don't really like spoof movies in general. I don't even really like Airplane. It's just not a thing I like. But this one is a low budget Airplane for slasher movies. And they even do a heavy breathing phone gag that you then would see in the Scary Movie franchise. And there's one good joke where it is essentially a PG rated movie, and they cut in the middle of the film to a man sitting behind a desk that talks directly to the audience and says that he has just gotten word that R-rated films sell better. And so he looks in the camera and says, "Fuck you." And then it goes back to the movie.
I have not seen this movie. That's pretty good.
It's genuinely the reason why this movie has an R rating is because of that.
And after that point, it doesn't then start doing R-rated stuff. It stays pretty PG.
Yeah, it's never violent. There's no nudity.
Wow, that's actually brave.
Yeah, it has a slightly interesting backstory where it says it was directed by Mickey Rose, but Mickey Rose was really the writer, and as part of a WGA Writers Guild of America deal, where there was some sort of strike at the time, producer Michael Ritchie had his name removed. So it's really directed by Michael Ritchie. And Michael Ritchie is known for Bad News Bears and the Fletch movies. So it does have a little bit of Fletch to it, but none of that money. And it also has an enormous amount of Dr. Pepper product placement, which I was never sure if that was supposed to be a joke or not. Anyway, not my kind of thing, but it is genuinely a slasher parody, which will come up again in a little bit here. Which brings us to Deadly Blessing, directed by Wes Craven. After her husband dies of mysterious circumstances, a widow becomes increasingly paranoid of the neighboring religious community that may have diabolical plans for her. You said you only saw this in a haze?
Yes, it was part of a 24-hour horror film festival at like 3 a.m. and I was passing in and out. So I saw I saw Ernest Borgnine's big fake beard, and I had a dream about his beard like wrapping around his neck like a snake.
Well, that's more interesting than anything that happens in this movie.
And there's a snake in this movie as well, if I recall.
Yeah, there is, because it gets put in it's basically Wes Craven doing a version of the Nightmare on Elm Street bathtub scene, but with a snake instead of a glove. This
is the dead zone of Wes Craven's career, when it was like, oh yeah, I guess that guy who he made a bit of a splash being a total creep, but I guess his career's done.
It's interesting because it feels like it was a made-for-TV movie, and half his movies from the 6-year period between Hills Have Eyes and Nightmare on Elm Street were made-for-TV movies.
But this one wasn't. It just has that feel.
It just feels like it, and I wonder if maybe it was going to be, because it's not that violent. It has a couple violent scenes that didn't really need to be in the movie, but it feels like a made-for-TV movie. It's definitely Wes Craven getting up to his slickness. Like, you know, like Last House on the Left and Hills Have Eyes both look like they were shot in a, you know, a dust storm. They're grimy movies, and you know, you get up to Nightmare on Elm Street, and by the time you're to Scream, Wes Craven's like Mr. Slick as far as horror movies go. So it has some of that. It has an interesting idea that it's an Amish themed horror movie, though they didn't want to offend the Amish, so they're calling them Hittites, which is in true Wes Craven form a historical reference, like the Shawnee Bean family.
Sure.
In Hills Have Eyes. It's got good ideas and it looks nice, but it's really awkward, and it has some of those. There's this really awful performances that Wes Craven can get out of people. Sometimes he gets really good performances out of people, and sometimes he just gets the worst performances, and I don't know what that's about. Sharon Stone is young Sharon Stone's in this, and she's okay. She's a minor character. And Susan Bruckner and Lois Nettleton are bigger characters, and they're pretty good. But, otherwise, even Michael Berryman is kind of awful in this.
The other interesting fact about this movie, I will say, is that Wes Craven, down the line, I want to say years later, would end up divorcing his wife, and this has only ever been spoken in hints and allegations, but apparently his wife had an affair with Sharon Stone, and him and Sharon Stone had some beef over that, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So
that makes me feel bad because I kind of hate Sharon Stone, because the factoid I read was that they wanted a spider to crawl across her mouth, and she demanded that they remove the spider's fangs before they do it, which basically means the spider has to die. And that kind of pissed me off because it was a tarantula, and I understand why people are afraid of tarantulas because I'm freaked out by most spiders, but tarantulas are pretty harmless and they're kind of cute, and I had friends that had them as pets as a kid. So I was kind of pissed off.
Yeah, I've heard that story as well. So anyway,
but fucking the director's wife is that's
bad
cool.
form. I don't know if I don't. Do you think it's cool?
I think it's kind of cool.
I don't know about that, but I don't think it happened while they were filming this or whatever. But I think his wife, who I think did some sort of production job on a lot of his early films.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's how they met, and that is allegedly happened. It's one of those things that people don't talk about, but it has been alleged enough by different sources that I'm apt to believe it. The way Craven describes it is he had discovered his marriage had been a lie. That's it. That's his official. So it's something. At any rate,
it is a slasher movie to a certain degree. It has some supernatural elements, but it's not a good slasher movie. There's you personally, Patrick, have told me that you think the good slasher movies are teen sex comedies that get interrupted by a mad.
That is my favorite form of it. Yeah.
Well, this is, for about a third of the movie, one of those weird Amish romance novels that is being interrupted by a murderer. I
apologize. I am not aware of these Amish romance novels of which you speak.
Oh. You you'd have to do a Google search after we're done here, because this is a phenomenon. You need to look into this.
I will look into this.
Also,
and those at home listening can look into this as well.
Oh yeah, it's a genre. They have like a whole, I don't know if there are any Barnes and Nobles left, but they have a whole section devoted to it. I stumbled across it one day and I was amazed how many.
Now, I like slasher movies that have a rigid structure of a teen sex comedy that characters keep getting bumped off, but no one knows, so the teen sex comedy happens, and then eventually there's not enough characters to continue the story. That's not the only structure I like for slasher movies. No. Such as House by the Cemetery, which is a baffling film, and I adore it.
This is Lucio Fulci, who I think this almost counts as a slasher movie.
It's real close.
It's awfully close. The best description you have on Letterboxd here is a deranged. Oh, well, shit. That's a spoiler.
That's just the end. That's just the. I will say this: I saw House by the Cemetery and then remembered nothing about the twist at the end, or because the plot was like, wait, what is happening?
We have to talk about the end. I'm going to describe it very quickly as. There is a person studying something or other has killed himself, and a different professor and his family are asked to move into the same house to research, and some bad shit starts going down. I just found out, I was trying to say if any of these movies are called something else. I just found out that this movie is also known as The Revenge of the New York Ripper in South Africa.
Hell yeah.
which makes me wish that there was some sort of Stephen King retcon bullshit where the duck-voiced killer from New York Ripper was somehow reincarnated as Dr. Freudstein, the zombie-ish killer in House by the
Hey,
Cemetery.
we got computers with microphones, and we got a computer. We can redub some of this. We can make this work.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Anyway, I'll try to. I wrote out a thing. I tried to compact this because I love to talk about Fulci, and you love this movie. House by the Cemetery is Fulci's last great movie, and he still had a couple good ones after this, but this was the last great one. It was the last in his high point of horror as well. It began with, I wrote Literal Barn Burner, the Zombie, which was called Zombie 2 in Italy, and Zombie Flesh Eaters in the UK, which was supposed to be sort of a ripoff of Dawn of the Dead, which became its own thing. And after that made money internationally, he was asked by other financiers and producers to make more stuff. Do whatever you want. Here's your money. Just make sure there's zombies in it. So he made a trilogy of really surrealistic, really violent zombie movies, basically. The first one was City of the Living Dead, which Patrick and I covered on one of his Treks of the Dead.
Check it out.
The second was The Beyond, and the third was House by the Cemetery. Some people call it the Gates of Hell trilogy. I've also heard it called the Zombie trilogy, and the Gothic trilogy. And in interviews, Fulci refers to it as the Artudian horror trilogy. Artudian. I am really bad with French words. You think I'm bad with Italian words? Hi, this is Gabe. Real quick, I was so embarrassed by the way I pronounced that I decided to redo that whole section real quick. Yeah, the dramatist was named Antoine Atu or Atoide. I've seen it pronounced both ways. I've been told it's pronounced both ways, depending on whatever. I don't know. He was a French dramatist, poet, essayist, actor, and theater director, widely recognized as one of the major figures of the 20th century theater and of the European avant-garde. He is best known for the concept of the theater of cruelty, which is what Fulci was drawing upon. And he also considers all of these movies homages to H.P. Lovecraft. This one, I would say, is the weakest as far as that goes. They're also all three connected by British actress Catriona MacColl. And a couple other actors appear between the three, but McCall is the lead in all three of them. And they all take place in American cities, The Beyond in New Orleans, City of the Living Dead in Long Island, and the fictional town of Dunwich. And this movie takes place on the outskirts of Boston. Uh-huh. So this is the odd picture out because it's not as surrealistic as the others, and it's a little less supernatural, but it's still not particularly logical. Yeah. And it is plenty gross, even if it's not as outrageously gross. It is really gory, and the gore scenes are, at least a couple of them, sort of fashioned in a way that like slasher gore scenes are.
Yep.
And it also has other things it has in common. A City of Living Dead has a scene where a pickaxe is broken through a sealed coffin and almost kills the actress who is McCall in that scene.
Right.
This one has a version of that where a little boy is stuck behind a door, and his dad's using an axe to try to break the door open, and the killer pushes the little boy's head against the wall, so he's almost getting hit by that. This one was also very clearly inspired by The Shining. The little boy is sort of Fulci's version of Danny Torrance. There's kind of like ghosts that are, instead of in The Shining where the ghosts are trying to make Jack Torrance do bad shit, these ghosts are trying to warn Danny Torrance away from the bad shit, is the best way to put it. So it's like the reverse of The Shining. And then, I'll just spoil the ending of the movie is that these people are in this house and there's all these mysterious killings existing around the house. And it turns out that the original owner of the house, Dr. Freudstein, has been living in the basement for decades and keeping himself alive by killing people and grafting their body parts onto his own body. So he's his own Frankenstein.
100%
basically.
Medically accurate.
And if you rewatch the movie, there's a really cool thing where at the beginning of the movie, he kills a woman, Daniela Doria, who is in a lot of the Fulci movies as murder victims. and he drags her away. And as he's dragging her away, he has one zombie hand and one adult man hand. And then in all the following scenes, he has one zombie hand and one woman's hand.
Wow. I feel like Fulci movies are full of little things that the movies are so hard to follow on a narrative level that I can never pick up on that sort of thing.
I did just find out the actress who plays the little girl claims that was her hand and not the other actress, but still, it's a woman's or girl's hand on one side, which is a cool little touch, I think.
So The Beyond is my favorite film of 1981. My favorite film of 1981, flat out. This I don't think matches up to that, but I do love this for a lot of the same reasons I love The Beyond and City of Living Dead.
Yeah.
The camera, like, I feel like in my mind, Dario Argento is the one who's known for having elaborate, sort of beautiful, striking colors and camera work and stuff, but the lighting in this movie is absolutely incredible. Especially like the nighttime scenes. There are just so many really strong highlights on people, and like there's one particular shot of someone's throat getting slashed and blood sort of flowering out of it in slow motion, and the light hits it in such a way. It's like legitimately, it sounds ridiculous, but it's like one of the most beautiful things I've seen in a movie. Like there's a lot of Italian horror movies that don't make any sense or like feel irrational or ridiculous, but they often feel haphazard in their filmmaking as well, whereas Fulci is an incredible filmmaker.
And I think that over the years, I've come to learn the difference between Fulci's beauty and Argento's beauty is Argento works in color, and Fulci works in texture. And I don't think when he's at his best, there's like nobody who has as good of texture.
And it's like one of those things where it's like Suspiria. If you watch it on VHS, you could really get what makes that visually striking. But you need to see a nice looking version of a Fulci movie to really get it.
There's a scene in this movie, the one about there's a locked door, and a normal movie would just go, wow, this door is so locked we can't get it open. But because it's a Fulci movie, we go to the other side of the door in an extreme close-up of the locking mechanism, the deadbolt being stuck and having to be dragged out, and with every drag, there's like dust that comes off of it. And that's a kind of detail that you don't see in almost any other film.
Or when she's like dusting the floor and she sees the sort of inlay of the tomb on the floor of the house.
Yeah. And the dad assures the mom, there's plenty of houses in this area.
All these houses here, they're all filled with fucking dead people.
Which I'm pretty sure isn't true, but it makes sense.
There is a sense, there's a purposeful, not accidental sense of humor that Fulci constantly implies throughout, especially the way he'll edit from one scene to the next, where something horrific will happen, and then it will immediately cut to someone just yawning and stuff like that. Like there's an intelligence at work here, despite the fact that because of the Italian style of filming, the performances are all terrible and the story is kind of impossible to follow. Like there's
the first two decades of Fulci's career were making very broad comedy, and I think a lot of people don't even realize that. And he was so he knows comedy. Yeah. He knows what he's doing when it comes to that.
And I think this movie really works. And it's a lot of fun, and it's really beautiful. And I think the audio tape sequence is one of the most disturbing sequences in any horror movie I've ever seen.
There's something about a haunted house is one thing, but then finding out that someone lives in your house, and that's what you're being haunted by as an actual physical person, a zombie person in this case. But that's a scarier concept to me. And that's one of the things that makes this an actual scary movie is that, if it was just a haunted house, I could rationalize that away. But like the idea of someone living in your basement, you don't know they're there and they're killing people that come visit your house is pretty out there.
Or like specifically, I'm talking about like the scene where he's listening to the other professor's audio tapes, like audio logs of what's happening. And he's just like sort of screaming about what has happened and why he ended up committing suicide. And you see basically the professor's imagining of what he is seeing. And it's like very wild camera work and very narrow focus as it like as the camera glides across surfaces that are just absolutely horrific, and there's just like child corpses that are really
Yes.
graphically murdered. Like, it's very expressionistic and it's really affecting.
The U.S. release of this was infamous for two reasons. The first one is obvious, and that the child actor Giovanni Frezza has a distractingly awful adult dub voice in English. It's like this,
especially because he has the adult name of Bob instead of the child's name of Bobby.
Yes, Bob. Anyway, that's one reason, and it's cute because on the DVD extras they interviewed the actor, and he formally apologizes for the bad dub. And but the bigger issue is that when it was put on VHS, and some of the, I believe the Anchor Bay Non-Blue Underground DVD version, some of the reels are out of order, and people don't notice because it's a Fulci movie. But if I remember correctly, the way to tell is that the real estate agent is murdered, and if you're watching the wrong version, she's murdered and then she's back again in a later scene.
Which I say is understandable to assume that Fulci would do that.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and you said something about audio recording. That was a thing that comes up in his version of Black Cat.
Oh,
too.
right, yeah.
Yeah, so he was into that at the time, it seems.
Wait, how many movies did he make in 1981? Is it those three?
3. Yeah, those
God,
3.
Imagine having a year like that.
Yeah, and then he actually dialed back on graphic violence in his movies after New York Ripper, but then started doing violence again when straight-to-video stuff happened, and he had major health problems and was trying to cover medical bills. So yeah, no, I ended that one on a day.
If I consider that a straight slasher movie, it would be my favorite of 1981.
Yeah.
I do not, so I
It's a gothic horror movie with slasher influence. It's a Lucio Fulci
but
movie.
the only oh, that's not true, because I guess American Werewolf in London, but it's definitely like Lucio Fulci has like 2 of the top 5 spaces or 3 spaces of my favorite horror movies of that year.
Right. Okay, so next up, speaking of movies that aren't slashers, Evilspeak, directed by Eric Weston. This one is summarized as: bullied by classmates, a pudgy military school student fights back by computer with the devil. Well, that doesn't make sense. He fights back using a possessed computer. It's not really possessed by the devil. It's possessed by a warlock, basically. And this one, this is a movie that has a wonderful premise that it can't quite live
just
up
doesn't
to,
get
but
started.
It tries, and I do enjoy it, but it just, it starts like a Hammer horror movie, with like what happened in the past, but then it quickly becomes modern, and one of the we talk about people playing teenagers who aren't teenagers. These are supposed to be teenagers and 20-somethings at this military school. These actors are so old. Clint Howard's wearing a toupee in this movie.
Yeah.
But he's still playing like a 19-year-old.
Well, yeah, he's like a ward of state, so he might even be 17. Yes. Like,
yeah. So who knows?
This is essentially Carrie.
Yes, it's Carrie, but there's the extra influence of a computer program,
right?
Which is something nobody knew what the fuck that was.
So that is like, the premise is absolutely delicious. The idea of like 1981 era computing already, it was sort of like a weird magic. Like, it was only the most hardcore hobbyists who had their own computers and stuff. So like the idea of that technology interacting with Satanism, where the computer is telling it to feed it blood and stuff like that. Like, it's almost like a weird Little Shop of Horrors sort of a premise. It's absolutely delicious, but it just takes forever to get started. They just don't quite know how to do anything with it. And then you think, oh, here it is, a murder happens, and then it just goes back to like 20 minutes of nothing happening. But the final 12 minutes, the sort of Carrie prom moment, is absolutely amazing.
Yeah. And I don't understand why this is written down as a slasher. I can't really think of... There is a shower scene but it's not a person killing the
No.
woman. It is the summoning of satanic pigs, basically, killed this woman in the bath, I guess, not the shower. Which is, again, sounds awesome. That he uses a computer to summon demonic pigs to kill a woman who steals his brooch. I don't remember. No, book.
Yeah.
She steals the book. The funniest thing is that Anton LaVey was apparently a really big fan of this
Hell
movie.
yeah.
Otherwise, it is pretty violent, and some of the violence had to be cut for an R rating. It has been put all back in on video versions. At the end, when he's killing off all his tormentors, and he just happens to get them all in the same place at the same time with no one else around, and that's not a satanic influence. They just happen to wander into this area. That he just sort of floats around and murders them with a giant sword. After all that, he doesn't even murder them with computer powers.
There's no magic, there's no rays that come out of him, lasers, electricity, nothing.
Yeah, it's bizarre. And the makeup effects aren't convincing, but they're kind of fun. This was banned as a video. I should say House by the Cemetery was also a video nasty for obvious reasons. This was a video nasty, and I think this was because this was the era of people thinking Dungeons and Dragons was going to make
right. Okay.
So a movie about people probably genuinely thought this could happen. The people in Britain that were like the parent groups that were seeing over all this stuff were probably afraid that children would somehow summon the devil with their Apple IIe's.
The only last thing I want to say about this movie is that Clint Howard acts way better than he has to.
Yeah, he is pretty good in it. The another thing that's funny to me is that the satanic priest's name is Esteban, and it keeps showing up on screens as a scary omen. It's like Esteban. And I just kept on thinking to myself, if I spoke Spanish, that would just be saying, Steve! Steve is coming for you. Oh, Steve! And it just made me laugh to think of. Also, I found out that the place where it was filmed, actually, Christine looked this up for me while we were watching it. Garden Street Academy in Santa Barbara was literally built with Native American slavery on the order of, in order to convert them to Catholicism.
Talk about a cursed set.
So, like, yeah, exactly. Like, that's almost the better movie, but anyway. And that brings us to the end of part 2. In 2 weeks, give or take a couple days, I will be discussing H.P. Lovecraft movies with Prophet of the Old Ones and co-host of Your Favorite Monsters, a Scooby-Doo podcast, Betsy Jorgensen. 2 weeks after that, part 3 of my discussion with Patrick will go live, after which I will go back to the monthly schedule for the remainder of the year. Until then, you can reach me on Twitter at either @GenreGrinder or @GabeM, as in Matthew Powers, on the Genre Grinder Facebook page, the genregrinder.com website, or directly at genregrinder@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you soon.